With the U.S. economy still in overdrive for some people, does the majority party still have the edge in Arkansas? With November just around the corner, is a red state having any purple thoughts? If all politics are now national, what's the fallout, if any, in our state? But first, the upheaval in the Arkansas Capitol, a fresh look at how it evolved and a man at the core of it. Arkansas Week, next.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for Arkansas Week. That rhetorical roar in Washington, D.C., Republican and Democratic. How much of it is heard here, and will it make much difference in Arkansas this fall? Well, we'll hear opposing views in just a few moments when we go to our roundtable. First, chaos of a different sort, this in the Arkansas Capitol. The political system, or more than a handful of its players anyway, are now ensnared in the criminal justice system. Indictments, criminal informations, guilty pleas or guilty verdicts, and the prospect of more to come. Perhaps many more. Some new reporting this week, a deep dive into the life and career of a man at the center of the whirlwind. Story appears in this week's edition of Arkansas Times, the primary author being David Ramsey, with reporting contributed by Benji Hardy, who joins us now. Dr. Hardy, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start at the top. It's a name that's been bandied about, but who is Rusty Cranford?
Well, so Rusty Cranford is a lobbyist, or was a lobbyist. Right now he's being held at Greene County Jail in Missouri. He pleaded guilty earlier this summer to a count of bribery. That guilty plea followed an earlier indictment which had listed several other counts. So that tells us he's most likely cooperating with federal prosecutors in some fashion. But that's getting sort of ahead of ourselves. So Cranford was a lobbyist at the Arkansas State Capitol for many years. He began lobbying, I believe, in the early 2000s. His niche was sort of behavioral health providers, and that leads
mental health services. Is basically
right. Well, behavioral health, sort of an umbrella term for both mental health and therapy, counseling, and also substance abuse. So, you know, services that are very much needed, especially in a lot of rural parts of the state. Some of the stuff we've been seeing recently about the opioid crisis sort of highlights just, I mean, how essential those services are for the state to provide. So, a growth area, really, in the healthcare field and in Medicaid especially. And Cranford, at the same time that he was a lobbyist for this sector, also served in a dual role as the executive of operations and executive vice president for the state for a nonprofit called Preferred Family Healthcare, which over the course of the past 10, 15 years or so grew to be the largest behavioral health provider in Arkansas, at least in terms of the number of service sites. They currently operate about 45 sites around the state. So in his role as a lobbyist, of course, he was doing what lobbyists do, which is to advocate for his clients' interests at the Capitol with legislators. I mean, that is what a lobbyist does. However, he took it a step further, and according to his guilty plea, sometimes greased those advocacy efforts with actual cash payments, checks, other favors performed for various legislators in Arkansas.
So we're talking here in terms of these services cost money, and the appropriations through Medicaid and through grant. We're talking not hundreds of thousands, but many millions of dollars.
Exactly, correct. And so Preferred Family Healthcare, and I should step back one moment and say the actual nonprofit itself, the entity has not been charged. It's and we'll see what happens in the future. I mean, there's definitely the implication within some of these plea deals that there were former executives at that nonprofit that were implicated in the wrongdoing, to say the least. But I want to make it clear that we're not talking about preferred family health care itself being accused by the federal prosecutors. However, yes, so preferred family health care received something like $30 million in Medicaid reimbursements in Arkansas alone annually in the past several years. So a major, major provider. They also received, as you mentioned, state grants, many of which were in the form of what are called General Improvement Fund grants. These are grants that legislators effectively were able to direct to projects of their choosing in their districts. And that practice has been discontinued for various reasons because it came out that both in the preferred family health care scandal and through other various General Improvement Fund related grants, it's just a tremendous opportunity for wrongdoing when you give legislators the power to sort of pick and choose what projects get funded.
Yeah, I've got $300,000 to spend and you get some of it, is basically what. How many people now are, to use the term, ensnared?
Well, you kind of lose
particularly
track.
at the present and former
right.
legislator.
Right. So there are, I believe, four former legislators that have pleaded guilty to something directly related to Rusty Cranford. I mean, depends on how you count, but former Senator John Woods, who was convicted earlier this year, former Representative Micah Neal, who pleaded guilty in 2017. Both of those are from Springdale. We have former Representative and former Senator Hank Wilkins from Pine Bluff, who pleaded guilty in April to accepting bribes from Cranford that were routed through a Methodist church in Pine Bluff where he served as pastor. And then we have former Representative Eddie Cooper, who is a little bit different than the others. He was not so much admitted to accepting bribes as after he left the legislature in 2011, he began lobbying with Cranford. He also worked for Preferred Family Health Care, so he was sort of a partner in crime, if you will, in helping to arrange some of these alleged conspiracies to redirect public money into the pockets of these bad actors.
Of course, the Capitol is just exploding with rumors, and has been, for months. How do we have any sense at all of how much bigger this thing is going to get?
Well, that's really the question. So there are several names that have not been named, but the information's provided by the federal prosecutors make it clear who they're talking about in some cases and sort of somewhat clear in other cases. The name that's sort of on everybody's tongue is Senator Jeremy Hutchinson, who is, I believe, the only sitting legislator right now who has been implicated directly in the information that's come out so far. And when I say implicated, that's kind of a vague word, so that the prosecutors have not named his name, but they have named a Senator A in some of these informations that fits his description. And I mean, he has more or less acknowledged that through a lawyer. He's denied any sort of wrongdoing. And to deviate just a little bit into what's alleged there, Senator Hutchinson is a practicing attorney. While he was a senator, and he still is, he's not running for re-election this fall, but he is still in the legislature. These past several years, he's done work for Preferred Family Health Care and for other clients of Cranford, and received very handsome retainer fees in the process, to the tune of up to $9,000 a month from Preferred Family Health Care. And that's added up to a lot of money over the course of several years. And critics say, well, look at what's happened here. Look at the facts. So they had a sitting legislator who was accepting money from this organization whose top executives have been sort of enmeshed in these bribery allegations. Are you telling me there's nothing untoward about that? Well, Senator Hutchinson says he was simply doing his job. I mean, we have a part-time legislature, and legislators have other jobs.
We talk about when these things come along, and they seem to, on this scale, about once every 10 or 15 years. The last one was the ad litem business of almost 15, 20 years ago. But the question always arises, how did this culture produce? Is there something fundamentally wrong with the political culture? And this isn't unique to Arkansas. This happens in other states. It happens in Washington. were you able to get a handle on that, or a new sense, a new appreciation of exactly how this situation evolved?
Well, it's a shame Dave isn't here because I think he really did the deep reporting into contact.
The key answer, I guess, is money. I mean, that's.
I think so.
Get
I mean,
biblical about it.
I think it is money. It's also lack of transparency, and I think that the fact that the Medicaid program became the source for a lot of this misdirection of funds is crucial. And not just the entire Medicaid program. We're not even talking about Arkansas Works, you know, which has been the focus of so much political controversy over the past, what, 5-6 years. We're talking about this one section of behavioral health services. It's just, when you have such an obscure sort of corner of the policy world where people don't understand how the money flows and only a few experts can really decipher some of these policy questions about billing and about how you license different providers, it creates the opportunity for people that are in the know to misdirect funds. We had, I mean, one of the more interesting of the charges to come out was actually a state charge rather than a federal charge against a man named Robin Ravindran, who is a former Preferred Family Healthcare executive, worked closely with Cranford, also did some lobbying work. And he's accused of devising this scheme to defraud Medicaid by billing in a certain way that reaped something like $2.5 million more than it would have if they had been billing it correctly. And the interesting thing there is Mr. Ravindran was formerly the program integrity head at the Department of Human Services. He was the person responsible for ensuring the integrity of the program before he was hired on at Preferred Family Healthcare.
If you know the system well, and if with hundreds of millions of dollars available there, and it has to go somewhere. I mean, these services are needed, as you know. But if you really understand the system, if you really want to get into the weeds, if you really understand the tick-tock, the dance of legislation, as it were, and the process, it's possible to do some things.
I'm afraid so, yes.
Through, I guess, a perversion of the system.
Right. I mean, and I think, I mean, one of the interesting things to me about this is, you know, all of these policy questions.
And are willing to use some muscle to do it, too. That needs to be.
Absolutely.
You know how to use the crowbar.
How do you use a carrot and a stick,
Right.
depending on the situation. And these guys proved very adept at doing that. And in a way, it's both entwined with the partisan politics of the Capitol, but also in a way sort of beyond it or beneath it, or however you want to phrase it. I mean, you had Democrats and Republicans both that are implicated in this, and really this wasn't about party politics. It was just about people getting rich.
We will. I know you'll continue to follow the story, so will we. Benji Hardy, thanks very much for coming on.
Absolutely, thank you, Steve.
Good work. And we'll be right back with a roundtable. And we're back, and we'll keep the introductions simple. Bill Vickery from the right, and Jessica Deloach on the left. Guys, what are we looking at? As November's right around the corner now. Bill?
You know, I think it is a very quiet year from an electoral politics standpoint. The races seem to be almost predetermined. Will be a big year for Republicans. So I think the real action are ballot initiatives. That's where you see Amendment 1, which deals with tort reform in Arkansas. That will be a very expensive race. If indeed the term limits measure makes it to the ballot, I think that's a foregone conclusion and will pass, and that will have significant impact on the Arkansas political landscape.
How, Bill?
Oh, well, I mean,
look at the numbers.
We get into it for just a second. We passed term limits as it is written in the fall. In 2020, there will be 80 open seats in the House of Representatives. 80 out of 100. There'll be 27 or 28 out of 35 state Senate seats. We are talking about a complete turnover in state government and electoral politics, and so that can reshape the Arkansas political landscape, no doubt about it. If that term limit, and I think if it makes the ballot, it will pass. It's the polling overwhelmingly popular. So that's a big issue looming in November.
And the funny thing is, what drives that, what makes people lean toward wanting stricter term limits, is that they think that with stricter term limits comes more ethical behavior, that you're forcing people to be more ethical. It gives them less leeway to engage in unethical behavior. And as we've seen lately in Arkansas, our legislative body has really been struggling with that. But it's really also hard to make a case that that stronger term limits will lead to better ethics across the board. In fact, what we were talking about is how all this does is that it removes people who have more institutional knowledge and know how to get laws made and passed, and it empowers lobbyists and the bureaucracy, and in some ways that's good, but in a lot of ways that's bad. And a lot of people will argue, you want term limits, show up and vote. That's all you have to do is vote and do your part to hold elected officials accountable. Now, on a federal level, Democrats have a lot of reason to be excited. You're hearing a lot about the blue wave, all of these sweeps that you're going to see across the country. Well, in a lot of ways, Democrats do need to feel encouraged that they can take back the House of Representatives. 538 put out some really great data yesterday that they have been updating each week, which will soon turn to daily updates, which is showing you where those big Democratic gains will be in the House. So you have this wide spectrum from about 14 seats to 35 seats that are potential options for Democrats. And they need somewhere in the 20s to reclaim that House. But they can't do it on an anti-Trump message. They're going to have to figure out the messaging that works best for people across the country. And that's probably going to be somewhere between what's best in health care and tax reform.
Well, when we talk about, for example, the term limits amendment like that, first of all, I can hear people out in the audience right now saying, you two are representative of the elites.
Yeah. Yes,
we want that. We want that big sweep. This is the era of Trump.
Yes.
We want it shaken up. We
Right.
want to wash it away.
But, well, first of all, believe me, there's nothing elite about me in my life. And I understand, believe me, I think for a very long period of time, the Trump voter has been underrepresented as far as the government is concerned in this country. They're angry. They have a right to be angry. They've seen an unresponsive government that doesn't work. I completely understand that and agree with that in so many ways. However, you don't want the heart surgeon who's just graduated from med school, right? I mean, yes, he's a doctor. Yes, he's been trained. The guy that I want has been around for 20 or 25 years. And so there is nothing that's not bad to have experience in government. It's not inherently good, but it's not a bad thing either. And to that point, if you want to see government work, if you're a regular middle-class voter out there and you want to see government work, you want somebody that's been around 8 or 10 years. Do we want somebody in office for 30 years? Of course not. But do we want somebody changing the face of government in Arkansas that's been in office for 2 years? Somewhere in between there is a reality that makes it work for voters, and I just think it's unfortunate, but it'll pass. If it's on the ballot, we will have term limits in Arkansas.
When will it pass? When will it pass, Jessica? I mean, do you agree with Bill?
I do agree with Bill.
Is this stasis for a while?
I do agree with Bill, but I do think that this whole take on elitism in government is very fascinating right now, because the majority of the people who serve in the upper echelons of the Trump administration are the embodiment of what it means to be elite. You've got people who have yachts in multiple houses and offshore bank accounts. That's elitism. And what's so interesting about it is that that is directly tied to the failure that his administration has become in so many ways. That's not to say that there aren't bright spots in his administration. I won't be completely unfair, but a lot of the headlines that you're seeing come from people who hold these high positions where they seem to be completely out of touch with the people they're meant to serve, and they have their own personal problems, which definitely muddy the waters surrounding his administration. So elitism, it goes both ways, right? And I agree with Bill when he says that you want people who know what they're doing. You don't want the heart surgeon that's 2 years out of school. You want someone with experience. And so why do we reject experience when what we're seeing right now is that inexperience is failing us all across the board?
I wouldn't go quite that far. I think you've got an economy that's been turned around because you have a chief executive who understands the previous administration and the regulatory burden that they put on just some poor guy who's trying to start a business as it exists.
Well, the trendline bill now was pretty airborne before.
Well, oh my gosh, when you look at consumer confidence, when you look at the way the economy, in terms of real growth, the Obama administration never touched 3%. We're seeing that as a baseline now. So I don't know that it's fair to call the Trump administration a failing government. Just the opposite. I mean, I think there needs to be a rethinking of the way government is. I mean, you look at our foreign policy. I think we have, for a long period of time, we have been a slave to what we call the post-Cold War era. Finally, Trump comes along and starts to rethink a lot of these relationships. Why should we continue to do bad trade deals with Germany just because they're an ally? You want to rethink those kinds of things. That's not bad. That's good. I think government needed a kick in the pants, and I'm happy to see it in many ways.
And I do think that there are a lot of people who will agree with, it's kind of fun watching government getting beat up a little bit, beaten up whenever you feel like they've been misbehaving. But let's take it back to what's best for people, right? So you have these tariffs that have had an adverse effect on hardworking Americans, on farmers. And then you have to go borrow money from the very people that you're trying to punish just so you can take care of the people that you accidentally punished with bad policy. That seems to be the definition of the Trump administration. It's just like you make one move, but you're causing further grief way down the road that you don't even know how to get yourself out of. So I think in some ways, why aren't people asking questions about what the Trump administration has been achieving? Because those achievements aren't positive. Why aren't we talking about Paul Ryan's gigantic tax reform plan? Because all of a sudden, the very thing that was going to be this huge boon for the Republican Party in November, they're radio silent. You're not hearing about it, and the reason why you're not hearing about it was because it too was a failure.
Well, let me toss this out. As late as yesterday or this past week, Governor Hutchinson, good conservative Republican, said, can we please knock this trade stuff off? I mean, he is a growth Republican.
Right.
But I also asked a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat from the Delta recently, is there any buyer's remorse in your part of the country, which went went very heavily for Mr. Trump? And he said, not much. So that's the tableau. What?
Well, look, we have been in a trade war for the last 25 years. We just haven't been the ones fighting it. And if you want to see America fail, continue the policies that have been in place across the board. This is Clinton, Bush, Obama, so it's bipartisan. The Chinese truly are our enemy as it pertains to international trade. And so I applaud the Trump administration. Do I think tariffs are a healthy thing for a free market? Absolutely not. But I also look at nations like India, throughout Eastern and Western Europe. I mean, you've got significant trade imbalances because they put tariffs on our products and we've done nothing about it. So I'm happy to see, it's interesting to me, Steve, you see a lot of members of the United States Senate and House of Representatives. They're happy to fight a real war when you send American men and women abroad to engage in real warfare, but they're scared to death to fight a trade war. And I think that's ridiculous, which should be just the opposite. We should measure fighting a real war at least go through as much introspection as now you see a lot of these folks who are screaming and yelling about a trade war. We can win a trade war. It is possible to win and see America come back out on top in terms of international trade, but we have to be willing to fight it in the first place.
Jessica.
Well, I think that, again, I go back to people being happy to see some shakeup. And the person that you spoke to from rural Arkansas, I would say that for as easy as it was for you to find that person, I promise you can find someone else who would say the exact opposite. You have people all across America who have been made promises by the Trump administration, and those promises were not kept. You do have people who have lost their jobs. Their jobs have been outsourced. They're struggling too. And so it's not just in Arkansas, it's all across America. And I think right now you're 2 years into this presidency. It's going to take a minute to feel these things. I honestly think that if Donald Trump were up for re-election today, I still think he would get re-elected. I really do. It takes time for people to feel the negative effects of bad policy. But what Democrats are working to do right now, and even some Republicans, is pointing out failing policies that are going to lead us in a really bad direction that's going to take years to get us out of if we just keep going down a bad road. But I guess credit to Donald Trump and the Republican Party for trying something new. Unfortunately, what they're trying isn't working.
Well, disagree, and I think part of the reason that you see Trump's popularity remain high is he's able to hold a mirror up to his opposition and tell America, it's me or it's them. And I think when you continue to see the National Democratic Party skew harder and harder to the left. Now we're talking about democratic socialist, and we're talking about sort of a Bernie Sanders model for leadership on the Democratic side of things. That's where I think you see the heartland, the Midwest, other places where people have to get up and go to work every day and pay taxes. They're rejecting that. So I think part of Trump's popularity is that America looks at who he's opposing and they choose him. So it's and maybe it's not that bleak, but there definitely is a rejection of these sort of hard left policies that you see beginning to dominate Democratic Party politics.
Well, but the Democratic Party, though, and you guys can disagree on this, but the Democratic Party, with some notable high-profile exceptions, Democrat Party seems to be moving a little bit back toward the right in a great many races, while the GOP seems clearly to have identified it's the Trump Party. So let me ask Jessica,
Sure.
what about this internal battle within the Democratic Party? I mean, what is it going to be?
I believe that internal battle is grossly overstated because there's always been a push and pull within a party that has such a large tent. That's the struggle of the Democratic Party, is that it works to represent a lot of people. But for as much as we can talk about Ocasio-Cortez's victory, we can also talk about a person like Connor Lamb. We can talk about where Democrats are closing significant gaps in areas where Republicans were winning by 36 points, and they're closing that down to 1 and 2 points when they lose now. Democrats are incredibly enthusiastic about this November, and it is because they know that the American people are ready to reject the Republican Party as it is, because their standard bearer is below, he operates below the dignity of what that office deserves, and everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about. The Democratic Party can struggle with what shade of blue they want to be, but the one thing they're not going to struggle with is what form of disrespect we're going to show some broad category of people today. We don't have that problem.
A few seconds left. Bill, I'll give them to you.
I think Republicans pick up at least 2 seats in the United States Senate. If they do lose control of the House, it's less than 10 seats, which doesn't give the Democratic Party a real governing majority on the House side.
Got to end it there because we're out of time. Thanks for coming
Thank
in.
you.
We'll do this again, and we'll see you again next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.